Welcome to the Demeere podcast. We talk about martial arts, self-defense, and a whole lot more. And now your host, Demeere.
Hello everybody and welcome to the next episode of the podcast. We are, believe it or not, already at episode 19. So that means that if you want to find the show notes, which is where I put all the links to the things that I talk about in this episode, if you want to find the show notes on my blog, the easiest way to do that is to go to wimsblog.com/19, number 19. So wimsblog.com/19. You can also find it in the description of this episode if you're listening to it on an app or in iTunes. But going to the blog is easier. So that out of the way, I have an episode planned that I hope you guys will like, because it's something that I wanted to talk about for a while now, but and it just so happened due to coincidences that I made this episode about that. So it's about dealing with injuries in the martial arts. Now I'll talk about that in a minute. First, as always, a little bit of news of what's going on. So the great news is that I finally finished the rehab for my shoulder surgery. So that's something that I'm very, very happy about. It's about 5 months now since surgery. And just early this week, I did my last session with my physical therapist, and he said, "You are cleared for normal activity." And my first thought was then, well, I think you and I have a very different definition of the term normal activity, but I chose to not say that out loud, and I said, "Thank you very much, and I hope I never see you again." He thought that was funny, so did I, and I left. Now I'll talk a little bit more about what's next for me when I'll deal with the first topic about injuries, but this is great news because it means that I can start training again. And I obviously immediately got on that. So the last few days I've been increasing my training slowly and gradually, and trying to work up to getting to as close to 100% as I possibly can. So that is what my immediate goals are, is just doing a lot more training than before, now that I can finally stop having to worry about that shoulder. I mean, the worry is not completely gone, but for the most part, I should be okay. So that's the good news. The second part of that thing is that I can now more or less start planning if I can do some more videos, instructional videos. And then the main one that comes to mind is shooting a companion video, an instructional video for the Boxing for Self-Defense book that I'm still working on. So depending on how it goes, how fast my training progresses, that I can't really give a timeline just yet, because I haven't worked through this kind of injury before. So I don't know what is realistic for me to be able to resume, normal practice and get a decent level again, so that when I show a technique, it doesn't suck. So it's kind of hard to give a timeline on that, but I hope to do that quickly. So that's something that I'm mainly looking forward to getting out there, because as you guys know, I very often write books and also then make an instructional video to go along with it, because I firmly believe that some people learn really well by reading, others just have to see it or have to hear somebody explain it. And if you can give a book and a video as a companion guide, then you kind of you manage to get as many people as possible, get them the material in a way that resonates with them best. So that's my goal always. So I'd really love to do that kind of video again for the Boxing for Self-Defense book, and hopefully I'll be able to give you guys some more information about that soon. At the same time, if my shoulder is doing better and I can train well again, then obviously I can finally start shooting the footage for the video membership site that I'm planning on doing, and that's on my Pivot Share channel, which I will show link to in the show notes, obviously. And the goal there would be to have a monthly video for self-defense techniques and so on, that I plan on just releasing every month new content, and hopefully that you guys would like. So I've been waiting for 5 months for this day that came on Tuesday, that I can finally say, okay, now I can resume my life more or less. So it's a happy day for me. And that is all the news I have for you guys, which means that I can delve right away into the main topic, which is related obviously, and it's dealing with martial arts injuries. Now, I've been training for 33 years now, so obviously I've had my fair share. And just to give you an example, I went to when I went to my general physician, my doctor, to get the stitches out of my shoulder, and she looked at my file and she said, "Wow, you've had quite a run. You've had quite a number of injuries." And I said, "Yeah." So and then we talked some more. Anyway, so I've had my fair share, obviously. And I've been wanting to do an episode about this for a while now, but just basically put it off because it's not obviously not a fun episode to talk about all this stuff. And also I'd have to look through all my files, my medical files, to get a complete listing. So which I did, and that's why I'm having this discussion with you guys now. And the main trigger for that was that I asked on my Facebook page, as I often do, for some questions for the Q&A part of this episode. And a few people asked me a specific question about injuries. And that's why I think now might be a good time to talk about that. So, and the first question came from Johnny Mendoza, and he said, recovering from a suspected meniscus tear, no twisting your leg is no fun. I agree with that. And then Quint OB asked, echoing Johnny, I'd like to hear about your many injuries and their resolution, how to maintain strength and fitness when injured, how to know when you're fully healed, and what to do to prevent re-injury. So these are two very specific questions. Well, one is more specific than the other, but I'm going to, tackle them both at the same time. And I think that going specifically for the meniscus issue and then more generally answering Quint's question, I think we can cover quite a bit of ground, and I hope that's going to be useful for you. Obviously, I am not a doctor. I don't claim to be one. I can only talk of my own experience and also my experience of, for the past 25 years, training with clients as a personal trainer and helping them through injuries and so on. So I do have a bit of experience there, but this is obviously not medical advice, so be warned. So that's first. Now, tackling Johnny's question about suspected meniscus tear. Dude, Johnny, if you suspect you have a meniscus tear, go to the hospital and get an X-ray or an MRI or whatever you need to get to confirm or deny whatever's going on with your meniscus. You cannot really start healing or treating or avoiding if you're not sure what's going on. Diagnosis is often the most difficult part, but if you can get that out of the way, then you know what your options are. So that is the main thing. If you have a meniscus tear, it depends on a large amount of factors how you deal with it. Too much for me to go into here, but it's not cut and dried. There's not just one specific injury. For instance, if you remember Tony Ferguson, the MMA fighter, he tore off one of his meniscuses recently, right before a fight. It's completely torn off. And last I remembered, he's going to be out for at least 9 months. That's a really long time. Now, not everybody, and it's a very extensive surgery. They had to cut him open really, really bad. He's got a really long scar now. And basically reattach it, or they used tendon from another part of his body or from something else. I don't recall, but it was quite extensive surgery, and it's very rare that this kind of thing happens. Which also means that he's going to be in for a long rehab. So that is one extreme. On the other end of the scale, you've got the kind of meniscus surgery that is basically, they put you under, they make 3 small holes in your knee, and they attach it back, or they fix whatever's going on there, and they wake you up, and you're literally the same day you're walking home on crutches and trying to put some weight on your knee. So that's the other opposite. That's the opposite end of that scale, and there's a lot of ground in between. So it's really difficult to give any clear black and white answer to the question, what do you do with a meniscus tear? At the very least, like I said, you have to get it confirmed. So go to the hospital, go to the doctor, and make sure that you know that it's a tear or not. If it isn't, you might be fine with just some rehab or perhaps some rest. If it is, and you don't treat it, then you can expect bad things to happen. Because if your knee becomes unstable, then in the long run, that's going to affect your hips, your ankles, your back, and so on, and just going to slowly accumulate wear and tear on other joints and muscles and so on. And then this whole avalanche, this whole snowball effect is going to start rolling down the hill, where eventually you end up with, for instance, severe neck pain, and it's all coming from that knee originally. But by that time, a lot of other stuff is also hurting. So just do it, man. Just go for it. Go get go to a doctor. Go get some advice. Go get some knowledge, in the sense that you need to know if it's injured or not. So that's the first thing. So I can't give a blanket answer, but try to get that figured out first. Now, let's imagine that you need surgery. Okay, what kind of surgery? Again, too many factors to talk about that. So once again, I can't give you a blanket answer, but I'll give you some general guidelines. So let's imagine you do the surgery and it went great. All right, first of all, do the rehab. Too many people don't do the rehab, or they don't put enough effort in it. It's not going to be fun. It's going to suck. You're going to hate it, perhaps. It's fine. Do it anyway. Do as much rehab as they let you do. Ask for that. Ask specifically, what can I do? What can I do to make this go faster? What can I do in addition to the rehab? Maybe they'll say, okay, do the rehab exercise every day, and if you can go swimming, for instance, that's great for your knee. Just giving an example that in some cases is given. I asked my physical therapist, okay, what can I do? He says you can do it again. You can do it twice a day if you like. Just don't, no pain. You should be in discomfort, but if you feel it pulling, or at a certain stage, if you feel that it's clicking, that tendon, if it's moving around, then you have to stop. Right? Guess what I did? I did my rehab twice a day. And when I went after, it was, I think, about 6 weeks that I went to see my surgeon, and he was very much surprised. He said, this is the best possible result that we could have hoped for. And I said, dude, I worked real hard, to get this far, because I was way ahead of schedule at first. And then I had a little bit of a relapse where I had felt like I injured it again. So I had to be really careful. But my first month and a half up to 2 months, everything was going great. So the main thing is that, you do the rehab and you focus on it as if it's training. It's as if this is how you get better at martial arts or self-defense, or for whatever reason that you train. You treat it as a training session. You're going to give it your all. I was literally in my first weeks of rehab when they transitioned from simply trying to mobilize the joint to me actually strengthening the muscle again and moving it. And I was working with like a paltry 2-3 pound weight, and I had to lift it overhead and rotate my arm and so on. And I was just grimacing and sweating profusely just to move it a couple of inches, and it wouldn't budge, and I wouldn't give up. And I do it anyway. That my therapist said a couple of times, like, okay, don't force it, don't force it. You shouldn't be in pain. I said, I'm not in pain. It's just really, really hard because it doesn't want to move, because the muscle had atrophied after, I think, about 9 months of being torn off my shoulder. So that muscle was not being responsive. But my point was, you need to get back to with the program. You, muscle in my shoulder, you're going to listen. I'm the boss over my body, and you will work again. So I fought for it. And that's what I mean. You have to be smart. You don't have to overdo it. That's why if you ask your physical therapist, okay, how does this work? What am I allowed to do? What are the limits? What are the parameters? And I asked a lot of questions during rehab. Okay, how do I do this? And so on. And it's a little bit annoying maybe for the therapist, but at the very least, he'll appreciate the fact that you're taking it seriously. Because more often than not, people don't do it. So do your rehab. And the main point is that you're only going to get one shot at that rehab. So you have to make it count. And I'll talk a little bit more afterwards. Now, when your rehab is over, what I would suggest is keep it up. Because all too often rehab sessions stop and most of the work is done. And they say, like they told me, you can resume normal activity, but you're not 100% yet. And that's what I wanted to explain when I just said the previous point. the last 10 to 15 or whatever percent that you still have left to recover, that takes a lot longer usually. So you need to keep on doing the exercise until you get those last 10 or whatever percentage points, because if you don't, you might never get those back. Now, in my case, my surgeon told me, he said, like, you might lose some mobility, which meant that I wouldn't be able to bend my arms to a certain degree anymore. My right arm, sorry. And so far, that hasn't been the case. But I can still feel that there's some soreness in certain movements. So what is my goal? My goal is to work on the difficult points that I still have left. I can do pretty much anything with my shoulder, but some things I feel that it's not as stable, it's not as strong. Well, I'm going to work on those over and over and over and see how far I can take it. Obviously, I'm resting, I'm being careful, I'm doing my warm-ups, I'm doing everything that the therapist told me, but I keep on going with the exercises, and for me specifically, it's going to be at a ratio of about twice a week as opposed to every day. If I have a little bit more time, it'll be 3 times a week. And that's just how you get the most out of rehab. I've trained with a lot of people, a lot of my clients who went through surgeries for whatever reason, and then they have the surgery, and then they do the rehab, and then they get to me. And what I then do is I call up the physician, I call up the therapist. I said, okay, what's going on? What can I do? What should I avoid? What would you want me to do, ideally speaking, for this patient? And we work together and we figure out what my client needs to do, and then we work at it. And then in most cases, if they do the work, if they can still, muster up the courage to do a form of rehab before they can resume normal training with me, then we get really excellent results. I trained somebody who had a similar surgery to mine and was really in horrible pain afterwards and lots of problems, and we managed to pretty much get rid of that completely about a year later. And now she's training really hard and is having great results. So just, keep at it. And it's like I said, with my surgery, it's now 5 months ago, and I'm officially done with rehab. But again, I have some range of motion issues mainly, and a lack of strength, and also because the surrounding muscles have been weakened. So my chest and back muscles and my arm muscles haven't been able to, in my right arm, use as much strength as I normally would. So that means that the muscles haven't contracted with force in almost a year now. And they also haven't done that repeatedly. They also haven't absorbed impact. So all these things I'm going to need to build up again. And that's why what my surgeon said, I think is very true, is that full recovery, getting to 100%, takes about 6 to 12 months for the injury that I had. So guess what? I'm going to have to work at it, right? And the same thing applies to if you have a meniscus tear and you have to have surgery. You're going to have to keep on going after you're officially done with rehab if you want to get the most out of it. Some people don't, and they're fine. But some people don't, and they end up with lingering injuries, and then later in life, and I'm talking about years later, sometimes decades later, they suddenly develop huge problems because one part of their body didn't heal up correctly. And then it's too late to fix it. Then you're stuck with whatever's going on. So that's my long speech on the importance of rehab. So let's move on to some other things. I would suggest work on basic movement patterns first. So basic movement patterns means squat, deadlift, lunges, split squat, and so on. So basic movements for the legs that you can easily practice, so that the big muscles get used to moving again, so your knee get used to tracking correctly over the foot again in those movements and so on. So that's something that I would definitely try to add to whatever workout routine you have. The goal would not be to lift heavy weights. You can even do it without weights. It's fine. It's about strengthening motor patterns in your body, so that you move a certain way, that the muscles fire in the right sequence, and so on. And basically get that knee used to working correctly again with the big muscles that let you move your body. At the same time, I would suggest working on ankle, knee, and hip stability. Now, if you look up ankle, knee, or hip stability exercises on the internet, you're going to find a truckload. Again, I would suggest talk to your physical therapist and ask what he says. But work on stability exercises for those joints. Why? Because they're also affected because of the knee injury. And if you don't train on those, you might develop a lot of strength again in the big movement muscles. But those stabilizers, they need to be trained up again too. That is often something that is forgotten because it's not fun. The squat and deadlift kind of stuff is a lot more fun to do. But the stabilizer stuff is equally important because that's what's going to let those big muscles move correctly and not mess up the rest of your body if it's out of whack. So it's like when you get new tires on your car, they need to line them out and need to make sure that they're fine-tuned so that the car rolls perfectly. And it's pretty much the same thing. It's like tuning your body to avoid injuries and problems. So combine basic movement patterns and strength training with stabilizing training for pretty much the whole lower body. And then let's say that all this goes great. If you want to resume your martial arts or self-defense training, build it up slowly. Don't go all out right away, but make a training schedule and show it to your doctor or your physical therapist and say, look, this is what I plan to do. What do you think? And this lets you do it in a systematic way instead of doing it by feel or by gut or like, whatever, it'll be fine. No, do it in a systematic, organized way so you can slowly build up the strength because that's how it works. You can't just go at it and I feel great, I can push it as hard as I like, and then hope for the best. That's not really an effective way of training. It's also quite dangerous to re-injure your knee. So you have to build it up slowly and progressively so your body has a time to adapt. That's how it works. Look up the word super compensation, and you will find that's the basic principle of all training, is that training breaks your body down, so to speak, and it's rest and recovery that builds it back up again, but it gives you a little bit more of what you weren't able to do well during the training. If you're lifting weight, the muscles that you train will be a little bit stronger if you did it right. If you're running, you'll get a little bit more endurance and so on. But that is a gradual process that you have to give time. And that means that every training needs to be followed by rest, and try to use the rest in such a way that if your recovery peaks, that's when you train again. So this is really oversimplifying training methods, but that's how it works. So build up your training again. Do it slowly. And then the last point I would say is that keep the exercises that you use to stabilize your knee. Do it like once or twice a week, even if it's just for 5 to 10 minutes. But do it once or twice a week and do that for a long time. Because as you readjust to normal life and your martial arts and so on training, that knee is still figuring out, okay, how do I deal with this reattached the meniscus or whatever, the surgery was about. Your body's still figuring that out, even if you don't feel it anymore. That's the trick. You might not feel that something is out of whack until all of a sudden something tears off, or your cramps up, or it locks up, and you need to go get some help. So that's why I advise to always keep your stabilizers a little bit more into shape by just giving them some attention once or twice a week, but do that for like months and months on end, maybe even for a full year. And after a while, you'll notice that, okay, you know what, this is fine, I don't have to do it anymore, but don't just stop after rehab. That's the main point. So, Johnny, I hope that's a good answer for you, that you can use that. Now, I'm going to move on to Quint's question. He said, okay, would you like to talk about your injuries and how you deal with them? So, I had to look it up. So, I went over the list of injuries that I had in the past 33 years of training. I'm just going to give it to you guys straight. So, that is several broken knuckles. I cracked a wrist bone, it's called a scaphoid, which is just between the hand and the wrist. That took about 4 months and surgery to heal. I've got tendinosis in my elbow tendons, which means that they kind of calcify. They become more rigid, which means that they might actually snap off. So that's something I have to look forward to. Shoulder surgery, so that's a torn supraspinatus muscle, and the labrum was torn. The muscle was torn off completely, and the labrum was torn and needed to be stitched. Several broken noses, and I also had surgery for a deviated septum because I couldn't breathe anymore through my nose, which meant that I couldn't really sleep, and having a cold was that sucked. So eventually I had surgery for that, and I can breathe normally again. The meniscus of my jaw doesn't function properly. It's slightly dislocated, so my jaw makes a clicking noise. Especially when I eat, it's not fun to be around me. I can't count the number of black eyes and bruises that I've had, so I'm not even gonna try. Bulging disc L4, L5, so that's just shy of a herniated disc. That's stabilized over the last 3 years. 4 years, ever since I had my leg surgery, which I'll talk about in a minute. And getting there to it, so a collapsed pelvis and unstable hips, and my shin bones were rotated 15 degrees to the inside, and that was all due to chronic exertional compartment syndrome, which I will link to in the show notes because I wrote a long blog post about that. Anyway, in short, that means that your fascia, your connective tissue, doesn't function correctly anymore. And when you exercise, the blood can't really flow well through the muscle. The muscle can't swell as it does when it gets more blood, which increases the tension inside the muscle, and that kind of squeezes everything off, squeezes arteries and veins off, squeezes off nerves, and that had a really negative influence on my health for years on end, and that took a long time to heal, and I'm actually still doing rehab for that, still not 100%. So what I also had was the torn hamstring a couple times, which is just a really stupid injury to get, but it happens, and it's very difficult, very annoying to deal with. Dislocated ankles, that was due to the compartment syndrome, because the muscles in my legs and ankles, they just atrophied, they were gone. And the connective tissue was very much weakened, so I ended up dislocating my ankles and walking around like that for a few years. And also arthritis in my toes, so I'm gonna have to have surgery for that sooner or later. So that's my list, and I left a couple of things out because I'm following the advice of one of my teachers and said never tell people about all your injuries. So I think I've got a quite handy list already. Just to put that into context, some of my teachers have had way worse than I have. Some people that I know have way worse than I have, so I'm not complaining. But Quint asked for the list, so there you go. Talk about your injuries and how I deal with them. So I decide on honesty, so that's why I try to give you as much as possible. And there's some stuff that I think that, again, I like to keep a few cards up my sleeve. You don't need to know everything. There we go. So how do you deal with this? Well, depends on if it's immediate stuff or medium to long-term stuff. So the first is get a course on first aid. Go with the Red Cross, go with whatever organization you can go with, but just do some basic first aid. Get that knowledge. It's not hard to get. It's not difficult. It takes a little bit of time. You might find it boring, okay, but just get the basics down so that when you have an injury, you can at the very least, have a little bit of an idea of what you should do. But most of all, obviously, you can help other people then. Or if it's you can tell somebody, okay, this is this injury and this is what you need to do. I can't do it. Please, you do it. So that would be the very, very low level basic first step that you need to take. Go do a course with the Red Cross, or there are other organizations. I don't know them well, but the Red Cross is the best known, and I did that years ago, and they have a quite good reputation for basic first aid, and they're pretty much all over the world. So you should be able to find a chapter near you. Now the next step is, what I would say is get some specific knowledge. And that will mean try to find information that gives you a way of handling injuries that are more specific to martial arts. And for that, there's a book that I would like to recommend, and it's called Fight Medicine by Dr. Michael Kelly. I'll put a link in the show notes so you can get it online. I have that book. It's a great book. It's a little bit dry, obviously, because it's just basically The doctor says, okay, this is the kind of injury, this is what happens, this is what you should do about it, and then he moves on to the next one. So, but it's very methodical. It goes from from top to bottom. The entire body is covered with the most common injuries that you can find in martial arts. I am sure that there are injuries out there that he didn't cover. However, again, as a little bit more specific than basic first aid, this is a good place to start. Doesn't mean that you can do whatever needs to be done to handle such an injury right away when it happens. But the main thing is that it lets you make good decisions on the moment itself when it happens. And that brings me to my next point, and that's really well written in that book by Dr. Kelly, is you need to distinguish between injuries that require that you just take a break, you stop training for a little while, and you relax a little bit and feel if let's say it's a muscle cramp, okay, just take a break and maybe you can keep going afterwards when it calms down a little bit. And if it doesn't come back, you're usually fine. Other injuries require that you have to stop training. So you stop right away and you give it some rest and maybe take a few days off and see how you feel. And if it goes away, fine, excellent, no worries. If it's a little bit more severe, you might have to take weeks off. Not that you can't move, but you feel that that it's a kind of injury that if you start training again, you're going to re-injure it and basically hurt yourself. So maybe you need to take a week or 2 weeks off then, or do only mild activity while your body heals up. And then there's the other kind of injuries, and that's the kind of injuries, that's why I think Fight Medicine is a really good book, because it helps you distinguish, okay, this is something that needs immediate attention. You have to drop everything you're doing and immediately take care of this injury. Obviously, a clear example would be when there's blood pulsating out of your body, out of whatever wound that you acquired. Time to take immediate action, which means knowing what to do depending on the injury, and which also often means, okay, it's time to go to the emergency room and get a professional to fix whatever's going wrong. So being able to distinguish between the different kinds of injuries and the different kinds of procedures that you need to do to handle them, I think that's a large part of dealing with injuries, because that allows you to make good decisions. I'll give you an example. Years ago, I broke one of my knuckles by punching one of my students in the face. I was wearing a 12-ounce glove, and he was fine. He didn't feel anything, but I broke my knuckle. I've broken knuckles before, but this time I wasn't quite sure because it hurt, but it didn't feel the same way as it otherwise would. So I didn't do anything, and eventually, I guess it just healed on its own. And now I have one finger in my hand that I can't really straighten out as much as the other ones. But if you don't know about it, you don't notice. I also have full function in that hand. So all in all, it healed quite well. But then eventually I showed it to my doctor when I remembered it, and I had to go anyway for whatever reason that I don't remember. He said, well, yeah, that's a broken knuckle. I'm like, okay, well, and he said, what do I do? He said, nothing, it's too late. It's healed up, so it doesn't get any better, and we're not going to re-break it. So that's it. This is me getting lucky and not taking action what I should have. Could have ended differently. Maybe that it would have healed incorrectly, and then I would have maybe required surgery, which is often, if something heals incorrectly, the surgery is often a lot worse than if you take care of it right away. Even if that does mean surgery right away. So it's a matter of choosing the lesser of two evils at that point. So that is a critical skill, in my opinion, is just distinguishing between injuries that are important, are less important, and how to handle them. Regardless of what the injury is, pain is a signal that you don't ignore. Now, toughing it out, it's all macho and stuff, but it's stupid. It's one of the stupidest things to do, is that, no, I can take the pain and keep on going. There's a huge difference between training at such an intensity that, matter of speaking, you're puking out your guts because of the intensity, you drop down dead to the floor afterwards. That is not the same as pain. Pain, the way that I'm talking about it, is about an injury. Something is broken, something is strained, something is torn, and that is causing you pain. If you train to that, That's stupid. The way that I tore off my shoulder muscle and tore off the labrum was I was warming up on the heavy bag, didn't even hit all that hard, did a couple of rounds. I had a phone call that lasted maybe a minute or two, and then I clicked off and I put on my bag gloves again, and I gave a light uppercut to the body on the heavy bag, and I wasn't really hitting hard, and I felt a sharp stabbing pain in my shoulder. And I knew, that's it, I'm done. This is bad. Something's torn off, and I could feel that the way it hurt, and then obviously after it hurt some more. But if I had chosen to train a little bit more and or even worse, start hitting real hard, I might have done some additional damage to the labrum and torn it open a lot more, and that could have caused even worse damage. So if you're in pain because of an injury, don't tough it out, and just treat it as a signal, the signal that it is, and it means that you need to pay attention to this. Paying attention doesn't mean surgery. It means you have to listen to what your body's telling you and then act accordingly. And like I said, figuring out how you have to deal with that. Obviously, you can always go to a doctor if you don't want to make that decision by yourself, obviously. The reason why I say that is if you tough it out, what often happens is that you train when you shouldn't, you train when you should rest and heal up. And that often creates additional problems, additional injuries, or the injury takes so much longer to heal. And maybe you end up having surgery anyway because it didn't heal correctly. So the end result of that is that you're often a much longer period out of normal training than if you would have let it heal up correctly right from the get-go. So don't ignore pain. Now, the next part, and this is what I always try to do, is work around the injury. So if you have an injury, get it sorted out, go to a doctor, and then you specifically ask, okay, what can and can I not do? So ask him, what is forbidden? He says, well, years ago I had shoulder problems from overuse, and doctor said, no, you cannot do regular push-ups. You have to do narrow push-ups, so don't bring your elbows to the sides for targeting the chest muscle, but if you do push-ups, do elbows close to the rib cage, more for the triceps, that you can do. Fine, so then that's what I did. And when you talk to your doctor about that, be specific. Ask specific questions, because many doctors are not used to a client asking these kind of questions. So they all too often doctors say, well, just take these pills and rest. And okay, that doesn't work for the average martial artist, because usually we tend to want to train anyway, whatever happens. But you have to work around the injury. And for that, you need to know what you can and cannot do. If you want a better answer, in my opinion, talk to a doctor specialized in sports medicine, because they are trained specifically to do just that. Let people try to be as active as possible when they are injured or sick or whatever. If you don't have a sports medicine specialist near you, the doctor that you go to, or try to find a doctor to go to who is used to working with athletes. Maybe it's college football athletes, doesn't matter, but he needs to be comfortable working with athletes and know that they're going to be active anyway and help you work around the injury. So that's a very specific part that I would suggest you definitely consider. Now, let's say the injury took some surgery or took whatever it takes or took some rest, and then you get to the rehab. I've said it before, do the rehab. I'm not going to rehash what I just said in the earlier segment where I answered John's question, but do the rehab. Just do it and get the most out of the healing process. And talking about that, again, perhaps the most important issue, have a good lifestyle. And that means, for the most part, eat well, don't eat crap. Your body needs to recover. It needs to knit itself back together again. It needs some resources for that, and that means healthy, good food that has all the nutrients that your body needs to heal. Because if you don't give it the right nutrients, it can't heal. It just doesn't have the right fuel to do that. But most of all, sleep. Get your 8 hours of sleep. And if you're thinking now, well, I can get away with 5 or 6 hours because that's all I need, nonsense. It's just nonsense. You can survive that way. You can get used to not sleeping enough. But there's only a handful of people, and it's a small minority, who have like a genetic predisposition to not needing a lot of sleep. The vast majority of the people on this globe do need their sleep. So sleep, rest, because that is the moment when your injury will heal the most. It won't feel like that when you get up in the morning and feel all stiff, but that's what your body does when you sleep. That's when you recover the most and the quickest. So get your sleep on. And finally, 2 more points. Never give up. I'll link in the show notes to my article about chronic compartment syndrome. I was feeling like crap for years before I figured out what was going on. I had a lot of pain, and I was having really a lot of trouble just getting exercise in, and then eventually it was I literally aged like 10 years in a month, and I went to a doctor. I said, look, I can't do this anymore. It feels like I'm dying. Something's off. And then it took over a year of going to professors, specialists all over the country to find somebody who could tell me what the hell was going on with me. And in the meantime, I got to hear all sorts of fun things like, well, you might have MS, you might have cancer, you might have this, you might have that. So you can obviously guess what that kind of news does to your mindset. And in the meantime, there was no certainty. Eventually, I found a doctor, and he had the diagnosis in about 5 minutes. And then we did a test to confirm it, and then we scheduled a surgery. And that was 3.5 years ago, and that was when I started very, very slowly seeing a path back to normal health and getting back to my old self. So never give up. Obviously, there were many times when I was ready to give up, but you know what? I'll explain a little bit more in the final point I want to make. But you have to keep on trying. Always keep on looking for solutions to whatever problem you have, because medicine advances every year, sometimes in a radical fashion, where something, a therapy that was always talked about but never really possible, all of a sudden somebody finds a way to make it work, and then like a year later it's trickling down through one doctor after another, and eventually it becomes mainstream. So you have to just keep on looking. There's always hope. It might be difficult, but there's always hope. And the final point, and this is the way that I mentally and psychologically look at injuries. It's not fun, but I think it's realistic and pragmatic. So here's the point. We all get old and fragile. We all die. Nothing we can do about that. So if that's true, well, then I'm going to train no matter what. And I might get old, I might get crippled, I'm certainly going to get fragile. Not much I can do about that, but I am responsible for my own life, and I know that if there's something I can do that I can influence, that is the time I spend training. So I'm going to train. I'm going to get 100% out of my body, no matter what that is. Especially given the injuries, I don't know what 100% is. I'm sure it's not the same than what it was 20 years ago. Doesn't matter. I'm still going to try to get the most out of it, and time will tell what that is. That takes a little bit of an adjustment, mentally speaking, if you want to do that. So you're gonna have to do some soul searching if you have a bunch of injuries, and see, can you get to that mindset? I think it's worthwhile. I've said this before. I think we only have one life. I think that's realistic, so I'm going to make the most out of it. So this kind of mindset for me doesn't only apply to martial arts training and injuries, but to pretty much everything. I'm just going to try to get 100% out of it, and try to get the most out of it, and hopefully lead a good and full life in general, and obviously specifically in my martial arts and self-defense training. So that was quite a long explanation for Quint and for Johnny. So I hope you guys are happy with all the things that I said. I hope this helps you out. I hope anybody else who's listening, if you've got injuries, if that helps you out. I do very much recognize the feeling of being down, being depressed, and just not really wanting to deal with the injuries anymore. But I think I think that's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you only focus on the negative, well, then more negative comes and so on. The reason why I look at it a little bit differently is that I was lucky to have my godmother. She was crippled. She was handicapped. She had polio as a child, and she was in a wheelchair. And she was one of the most active people that I knew as a kid growing up. She would swim. She would do archery. She had this hand bike that she used to get around town, and we would play wrestle on the ground and everything, and she'd be, she'd beat me up basically. So her handicap didn't define her. So what would I do if I would, my injuries let me define me? So I don't think that's the right way to go. So I choose to define myself differently and just say whatever the 100% is that is there, I'm going for it. So that's it. Now, moving on to the final part, we get to the Q&A. One of my friends, Jerry Sheila, he asked a question, and I think that's an interesting one to answer as well. So for the Q&A, here's his, and it is as follows. After we are either confident of our ability to defend ourselves, or we are too old to compete and sometimes broken, why do we keep training? That's an excellent question. There's many ways that I could go with this question, and I'm just going to take the approach of listing the several different reasons why I do it. This is only me, so I cannot talk for anybody else, but this is the way I see it. So I've been training for 33 years, and as you guys just found out, if you don't know already, so I have quite the amount of injuries. So I wouldn't say I'm fully broken, but I'm pretty banged up. But I can train, increasingly more intensely now that my shoulder is cleared for action again. So for me, it boils down to, I still enjoy the training. It's fun, and I like to have fun, and I want to keep having fun for as long as I possibly can. And training has always been fun for me. I enjoy it tremendously. It's one of my great passions in life. I'm lucky enough that I can spend a lot of time training, so why wouldn't I do it? So even after these 33 years and all these injuries, it's still a lot of fun. I had my first sparring session a few days ago with one of my students for the first time in almost a year. And I'd almost forgotten how much fun that was. I'm like, oh, this is awesome. I get to do this again. Obviously, I can't spar the same way as about 10 years ago, but who cares? I'm having fun. So that's maybe the main reason for me. Moving on to a few other reasons. One of them is obviously health. As we get older, again, like I said, we get more fragile. So training martial arts can keep you fit and strong and flexible. And these are three main components of basically improving the quality of your life as you age. Because as soon as you get old enough to stop moving, what often happens is that you cannot move anymore after a while, and then you become dependent on other people. And my goal is to stay out of a retirement home for as long as I possibly can. I want to live my life on my own terms, and I don't want to have to depend on anybody else. Or I also don't want to be a burden for anybody else. So I think it's my responsibility to stay as fit as I possibly can. And I think martial arts is a great way to do that. Another point is that, in my opinion, old doesn't mean you can't do anything when you're in a self-defense situation. So your training isn't wasted even then, even if you get older, or even if you're injured or quite competent already. Which brings me to the next point, is that use it or lose it. If you stop training, you shouldn't expect your skill, whatever it is, to keep on being at the same level. If you stop training, you can expect your skill to deteriorate. So why would you stop training even as you get older or a little bit banged up? The next to last point for me is that, after over 3 decades, I'm still learning. I still haven't scraped the bottom of that barrel. There's still so much left to learn. There's new information coming out. There's new people, new teachers with new insights and so on. So for me, it's still extremely gratifying to keep on training because I keep on learning. And that is one of my main driving factors, because I'm pretty much the eternal student. No matter how much I enjoy teaching, I enjoy learning a lot more even. And that brings me to the final point, and that is that martial arts and self-defense, it is something that fascinates me. I have a bunch of other topics that I find fascinating as well, but I'm not really good at them. I'm reasonably skilled and knowledgeable when it comes to martial arts and self-defense. So I very much enjoy training in those and keep on going, because that means that I might have a shot at digging deeper and going further than other people who haven't spent that much time training. It's not that I'm so awesome. It's just that if you spend a lot of time training, well, hopefully then you learn something, and then that allows you to go further than people who don't train as long, hopefully. Now that brings me to a blog post that I wrote many years ago, and it's called "The Cure for Arrogance in the Martial Arts." And I'll put a link in the show notes, but I add a link to that article on my blog about a guy who had a really great way of visualizing what is a PhD. And in that, he shows basically the circle. He draws a circle and a big one, and in the middle, small circle, there's you. Small circle, that one is basically signifying all your knowledge, and the big circle is all the human knowledge in existence. And when you start studying, you have a little bit more general knowledge, but then you start specializing, and then his circle becomes almost a narrow straight line that goes towards the edge of that bigger circle of all human knowledge. And eventually your PhD, normally, that's when you push against that barrier of the outside circle of all the human knowledge and hopefully budge it a little bit and make it a little bit bigger. And that is your PhD thesis, obviously. Now, if I'm lucky, I might eventually discover something that pushes the boundaries of the knowledge and skill we have today when it comes to martial arts and self-defense. And that is one of my personal goals. I hope that I can one day do something that people afterwards will say, okay, this is worthwhile. This is something that helps us out and that we can build upon for the future and have a use for. And that is my way. Hopefully, if I can manage to do that, I can die a happy man, because then I will have pretty much repaid the debt that I owe to the martial arts for letting me live the life that I live right now, which is pursuing my passion. And that if you can pursue your passion professionally, I think that's the best life you can possibly lead. So I'm very grateful and lucky to have found the martial arts the way that I did, to have found my teachers, and be able to do this professionally. So if I can then eventually, hopefully, find a way to repay that I've been so lucky to have, well, that would make me very, very happy. So that is in a large part while I'm still training and teaching and writing and making videos, because it forces me to keep on thinking and looking and analyzing. And hopefully one day I'll end up doing something that when I'm no longer here might actually, not be completely forgotten and might be used by other people to keep themselves safe and to help their training. So that's it. As Jerry knows me very well, he could have seen this coming, that I would throw a bunch of things at him back. And I was gonna make a joke here, but I'm not going to do it. So Jerry, you can imagine that I said that joke to you out loud. I'm not going to do it for the other people listening. Which means that now we have come to the end of the episode. Hope you guys enjoyed it. As always, like, share, subscribe. Join me on social media. If you want to support the podcast, and I've said this before, but maybe not enough in detail, you can do so on Patreon. Again, link is in the show notes. And on my Patreon page, I have a truckload of content. I calculated it, and I think I've got about 22 hours of instructional video that I've made specifically for and only on Patreon. So there's a lot of content there. There's a lot more to come. And my patrons also get access to me directly, and they also get obviously the opportunity to ask me more questions and help me, find ways to make content that you guys enjoy and can find a use for. So check out my Patreon page. And then for the coming episodes, I've got a bunch of interesting guests planned. I'm not going to announce it just yet, but I've got a bunch of them planned. That's going to be really awesome. And I look forward to interviewing them. So that is for the coming weeks. I am going to work on that. As always, thank you for listening, and I will talk to you guys next time.
Thanks for listening to the Win Demeere podcast. For more information, go to www.wimsblog.com.